Hello everyone, we are still at the PMI Global Congress 2013 here in New Orleans, and with me today is Jack Ferraro from My Project Advisor. Hello Jack.
Hello Cornelius, good to see you.
You had your presentation yesterday and it is titled The Real Problem with Your Portfolio, Multitasking. How did it go?
It went well. I think we had a good turnout, and we were able to present, I think, some new concepts to the audience.
Right. The unfortunate bit you mentioned earlier was it was at 4:45, right?
Yes, late in the day. Everyone was getting ready anxious to get out to go to the party afterwards.
I can imagine. And now it's early in the morning. You have your coffee, I have my tea, and we want to see why multitasking is the big problem here with the portfolio. So, what is the problem?
Well, I think the problem really started, and what got me interested in this was some research that was done on PMOs. I think the industry knows the challenges PMOs have had over the last several years. I saw a stat today in the conference that after 3 years, 75 of PMOs fail. There's been some more research done that basically shows that from 2006 to 2010, 50% of PMOs failed or closed down. And one of the biggest challenges that was cited in this research, even for mature PMOs, was that only 37% of them actually have a resource management process for optimally estimating and allocating resources, and only 24% of all PMOs. So basically three out of 4 PMOs do not have an optimal process for estimating and allocating resources. And what they cite in the research is that resource conflicts are probably the greatest challenges for PMOs going forward. So that got me interested in, and this is something I see every day in the consulting practice that we run at My Project Advisors, is that organizations that share resources across projects and portfolios have a tremendous challenge in operating a shared resource system efficiently. And there's tools and techniques that we're trying to bring to the community to allow them to more optimally share those resources to improve the throughput of their portfolio.
When you say resources, are we talking about human resources or any kind of resources?
Well, it's actually both. It's mainly human resources, right? You have critical resources, subject matter experts that are needed on multiple projects, and oftentimes they're needed at the same time on multiple projects, and that causes them to start this multitasking, working across various projects without completing the task that they're working on. However, there's also competing resources for physical resources, whether it's systems and environments as well, and that is also part of the challenge.
Okay. Just to bring everybody onto the same page, what is your definition of multitasking?
That is a great question. First of all, might be good to even describe what is a task in terms of how we view a task. A task is the work that a subject matter expert, somebody who's working on a project, an analyst, a developer, a tester, an engineer, a business analyst. It's the work that they do to create an output that is required by another worker. See, the idea is that we're taught, as in the PMBOK and through our project management training, that projects are basically a series of interactions where we're handing off work product throughout the sequence diagram to basically create a product, service, or result. So a task is punctuated by these interactions and transfers between these subject matter experts. That's how we define a task. How we define multitasking is when a subject matter expert, a project worker, starts to work on a task. However, they're not able to complete that task because they have to stop and work on another task. And very often that is a task from another project, competing projects, competing priorities within organizations. So multitasking nearly always involves tasks from other projects, and very often requires workers to go back and forth across tasks from projects several times before they actually complete the output that they're required to hand off to the next project worker.
And just to make it clear here to everybody, we're not talking about multitasking within your project environment. Right now I'm developing, and then somebody comes over to me and says, "Hey, can you help me with testing of your code from yesterday?" And you multitask between that. But you are developing on project A, somebody comes along and says, "Oh, you have to stop what you're doing and you have to develop something for project B." And while you're doing that, someone comes along and says, "Oh, we need you to develop over here for project C as well." And then you are jumping between projects and doing tasks on various projects, which affects the portfolio, right?
Correct. It certainly happens within projects, but the real devastating effect is the competing priorities in a multi-project system where you have competing priorities. That's really where the devastating effects can be measured, because you see these entire portfolios of projects, due dates and commitment dates continually slide to the right. And executives continually become frustrated because they see their priority projects not move to the right by just days or weeks, but often by months. And it becomes a very frustrating situation for the executives who are obviously funding these PMOs, funding the resources to manage this. And we think this is a major contributor to some of the challenges PMOs face in demonstrating their value.
All right, so that is the problem. Multitasking causes delay, not just in one project, but throughout the portfolio. What happens when multitasking is removed, and are we sure that it's actually multitasking that's causing that improvement?
Yes, we've had implementation studies done where when multitasking was removed, the throughput of the organization, of that portfolio, doubled. There's this an organization back in 2002 and 2003 when they systematically removed multitasking from their operation. Their number of projects that they were able to get done within a year doubled. So if you look at that in terms of what accountants or CFOs may look at, is that organizations, PMOs, information technology shops, where they're sharing resources, it's very often that they are only achieving 50% of the productivity that they're actually able to achieve. So in other words, half of their payroll is essentially going to waste. It's basically going up in flames. And what often happens is when their first inclination is when they try to improve performance, they generally throw more resources at it. They throw more money at it. And it actually makes the problem worse until you can have a structured way and fundamentally change the structure of how the system works to be able to remove multitasking permanently and achieve this, which is oftentimes doubling of the increase in productivity.
All right, before we get to how we remove it, let me ask you something different here. Why is multitasking so prevalent in organizations that share resources?
That's a great question. And it's certainly one of the things that it's clear is it's often, very often, not the worker's fault. The challenge is that we have project workers and organizations, PMOs, that sign up to do projects for executives. And executives often think that their project is the most important or one of the most important in the organization. And they're asking a shared resource pool to get these projects done. So by default, you have this intense nature of competing priorities within organizations. The real challenge is here is that within many of our project environments, we have expensive knowledge workers who, if they do not have project-related work or enough project-related work, become opportunities for cost reductions. Internally within the organization, it almost incents people to the organization to continually take on these additional strategic priorities because if not, they feel that since they're very often a cost center, that they become opportunities for cost reduction. Another reason why some policies sort of force multitasking is executives at the same time are pushing projects into the pipeline because they certainly feel that they want to make sure that their expensive knowledge workers have enough project work to guarantee that they don't run out of work. Okay? And then lastly, another policy or procedure that often occurs within project reporting is once we start a project, it's very common that we have to continually show progress. It's not easy for workers to go to their superiors and say, oh, well, we haven't demonstrated any progress over your project over the last 2 weeks, Mr. Executive. That's an opportunity to lose your job, or certainly lose maybe your chance at a promotion in the company. So there's this tremendous incentive for people working on projects that are in process to continually show progress. The fundamental problem is that there's a lack of acknowledgement of how that we've essentially have created what we now call a continuous system or a continuous flow of projects through organizations. When we first started project management, there was this concept of the single project systems, where we had a project was created and there was a system created around that project, a system of people. The people were able to essentially say insulated from other competing priorities to complete that project. And that worked very well. One of the most classic examples is the SR-71, Kelly Johnston Skunk Works project, where they went from concept to prototype within 9 months, and it became one of the flagship airship vehicles of the Cold War. One of the benefits that they actually had, because it was so classified, that they were able to sort of isolate these people away from everybody, but that's not the case very often in our organizations today. What has happened is that as we've continued to add single project systems, the cost increased dramatically. People within the organization, maybe CFOs, accountants, started to see this cost, and what they then perceived that there was a unacceptably low utilization of these project resources because they were all single project systems. So the answer to that was, well, let's add more projects and share resources across projects, aka matrix management. Now that we fundamentally introduced this concept of matrix management in many of our organizations that execute projects, we're still hanging on to some of the old practices and policies that were created when we were running single project systems. And we're not fundamentally recognizing this shift that we now have a continuous flow of tasks through a system, and we have to have somebody operate the entire system across the continuum of resources, projects, and time.
One interesting statement that you made yesterday when we spoke as we met in the hallway, sort of in preparation of our interview today, is similar to what you said earlier. You said that you tell your clients that if you currently have the ability to get 6 projects done per year, when we help you to fix your problems, you will be able to get 12 done. So, improve by factor of 2. How long does it take you to help an organization review their portfolio, review the multitasking, address the problems, and get them onto the right track to doubling their throughput?
For a simple answer, it's generally a 9 to 12 month process. We structure it in a way that you can get some short-term gains. However, to make the changes permanent, right, to ingrain these changes, these structural changes into the operation, very often takes up to a year. The approach that we use when we go in is we very much focus on the organizational change management aspects of this, because the problem here is really structural. It's not the project managers, it's not the project workers. It's recognizing that we have this continuous flow system that we now need to be able to manage. So the first thing that we do is we come in and we start to benchmark the data of the current operation. And the data that we use and that we collect is sometimes a little bit different than what most PMOs look at. We focus more on operational systems measurements because we are measuring a system as opposed to performance measurements. Once we start to benchmark this data, then we go through a coalition building process where we do workshops to get the key executives, resource managers, key project managers on board with recognizing challenges that are incumbent upon them and the devastating impacts of multitasking. We actually have a live simulation, not computer-based. It's actually, we get 14, 15 people in a room, conduct the simulation. We chart the results on the graph. We're conducting multiple projects, rolling dice to get actual task durations, and we can actually see what happens in a multitasking environment versus a non-multitasking environment. Once we build this coalition and have the right people bought into this, then what we do is we actually create, and we recommend that we create a chief matrix officer within the company that is essentially responsible for running the operations of this continuous flow system. And one of the key things that this chief matrix officer needs to do is to continually protect the operation from the system basically being gamed. And what I mean by being gamed is having an executive push their project to the top of the line. Now, we all know that urgency priorities come up, but we need to try to have a stable list of sequence projects that we can continually resolve resource conflicts against. And using good project planning, good methods to make this data visible, every time a resource conflict comes up, the goal is to resolve it immediately, right? So that the worker can continue finishing their task before they move on to the next. This doesn't mean that we just do one project at a time. It's that we can be doing multiple projects at the time. However, when resource conflicts exist, we now have a operation, somebody running the operation, this chief matrix officer, that collects the proper data to be able to resolve this resource conflict immediately. What happens too often in organizations is, right, we have a resource conflict, and then the people doing the work have to sort of escalate up the ladder, right, to management. Sometimes it then has to go across the organization, maybe to other executives, and then come back down. This process takes sometimes days, if not weeks, to resolve these things. And in the meantime, workers are thrashing back and forth across multiple projects, trying to keep them all moving, which is devastating to productivity. So we build this coalition, and we implement what we call the letter process. The letter process is very simply getting everyone in the organization to understand how resource conflicts will be resolved within the system. And that it's not to say that one project is more important than the other. It's to get everyone to recognize that we're trying to run the shared resource system in the most optimal way possible. And then we go in and we work with the PMO and the project managers to be able to do the proper planning, to get the proper detail in place and the proper information systems in place, so that we can have better opportunities to say, okay, when should, not when is this next project going to finish, but when should this next project start based upon the current work in process. And we can then start to increase the confidence of the commit dates and provide an enterprise view of the portfolio with more accurate, up-to-date information in terms of the performance, operational performance of the portfolio to continually achieve, their strategic benefits.
All right. Before we come to my final question for you, I'd like to take a step to the side, because this is not the first time that you and I are sitting together and recording something. A few years back, we recorded a presentation of yours for the PDU podcast called The Strategic Project Leader, based on your book. And version 2 of your book is in the making, right?
Yes, it'll be out next year this time. It's coming out through Auerbach Books, which is part of Taylor and Francis. I'm working on a second edition, and it's a very interesting project for me to go back and, after about 5 or 6 years, update this book and sort of see what's changed in the industry, what hasn't changed. Is there really still a need for a strategic project leader? As you can see from the conference and many of the talks, there's still a tremendous number of presentations that are talking about the importance of leadership in project management and stakeholder management. We now have a new knowledge area, the PMBOK of stakeholder management. So those issues have not gone away. And I'm very much looking forward to getting that project completed and hopefully being back at the Congress next year and talking about it.
All right, back to your presentation. The real problem with your portfolio is multitasking. What I like about the white paper is that in the end, you have a section, what you can do. And the first sentence there is the degree to which one can remove multitasking from the project portfolios and programs of an organization depends of one's span of authority and influence. And then you break it up into the three categories of senior management, project managers, and project workers. Can you tell us, sort of in closing, what these three groups can do in order to begin removing multitasking from the program and the portfolio?
Yes, everyone has a role in this, even though it is to make the benefits permanent, it really needs to come from the top down. So what workers can do to help get this problem under control is they should accept assignments exclusively from their supervisor, right? Very often, and sometimes I'm guilty of this when I'm working in organizations and you're trying to get people to work on your project. It's very helpful for people working on projects to accept assignments directly from their supervisor so that there's an acknowledgement and visibility in terms of what they're working on. And again, they should also be able to say no very politely. In other words, if they are asked to do something on somebody else's project, that they simply say, well, I would need to check with my supervisor, otherwise I would be betraying their trust if I went off and went ahead and worked on this. And if they do are continually to be pressured into that, another way to sort of conveniently push back is to ask them to say, well, I'm working on this task for project A, and now you're asking me to work on another task for project B. Which one is more important, and which one should I finish first? Because we don't want them working on both at the same time and going back and forth. So there's some things that the project worker can be skilled at in terms of just trying to help at least elevate the recognition of this multitasking and at least getting the supervisors involved as appropriate. PMs can also help reduce multitasking. I think one of the biggest things that project managers have to do is just basically recognize and use their authority to take complete charge of the planning of all aspects of the project, and not simply put very let's say less than strong plans into the work in process pipeline. There needs to be a standard around planning and artifacts that go into portfolio project management so that there's enough information that can be gleaned from that to see where potential resource conflicts are going to come out. One of the things that is often missed is not just the resource conflicts within the project, but how the resource conflicts across projects, other projects that are currently in flight or in process, or other ones that may be starting at the same time. Working with their peers and other project managers to really try to understand key resources may be impacted is something that project managers can do. And at the same time, they also need to start thinking more importantly about their commitment dates in terms of when projects are going to be done. I think one of the things that project managers tend to do is think of duration as a deterministic estimate or a deterministic value. It's going to be done on March 31st. And a lot of that is because of the pressure from management and supervisors to have something that they can use to make decisions on. However, we should really, I think, start building plans where we look at estimating as probabilities. We really don't know the duration of a task until it's completed, all right? Until it's actually done. Otherwise, there's some level of probability, some level of variation. And we have to start looking not just at the task level, but of our project level in terms of what we think our estimate is, and then what is the variation around that, and hopefully having a commit date that incorporates that level of variation that is acceptable to the key stakeholders. And I think that's something else, and that's something actually that the PMBOK talks about in estimating. But very oftentimes we put out dates on portfolios of having very deterministic level dates. So those are the things that I think that the workers could do. The senior management cure is really critical as well. And I think one of the things senior managers need to do is recognize that we have now this continuous flow of projects, of tasks through a system, and we need to operate that as a system. And we need to be able to try to maintain as best we can a stable sequence of projects to allow the people running the system to be able to resolve resource conflicts in a way that is politically acceptable, okay? So that they can make good operational decisions to maintain the productivity of the system without having their careers be impacted by that. I think that's probably the biggest thing that senior managers can do, is understanding that. That's part of the education that we try to give them, and as well as then showing the results of it. But understanding that and recognizing it, these are the organizations that are really taking the bull by the horns and dramatically improving their portfolio performance.
All right. Wonderful. Jack, thank you very much for having been here today and talk to us about how we can improve the throughput of our portfolio. I appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you, Cornelius.